It's an interesting story for a variety of reasons.
May 4th, 1891 turned out not being a very good day for the schooner-barge Atlanta. She was a relatively new vessel, but that didn't matter. Lake Superior would have its way that spring day, and also some mistakes along the way would take the lives of some of the crew. The Atlanta was upbound from Buffalo, New York to Duluth, Minnesota. They were in tow of the steamer Wilhelm. When they rounded Whitefish Point, they got caught in a northwest gale.
They were just off of Deer Park when the captain of the Wilhelm determined, hey, we're going to be in trouble if we keep doing this and if we keep trying to move west. So we're going to have to turn around and try to make a run for Whitefish Point. And whenever they did that, they had a couple of different fears that maybe one of the ships would get caught in the trough of the waves or the tow line would part. That's exactly what happened with the Atlanta.
The tow line snapped. There was nothing the Wilhelm could do to help. The Atlanta was drifting, and drifting fast.
They had to sail for their lives at that point because of how bad that weather was. They tried to get their sails up, and the foremast was ripped right off. So it tells you how dramatic the weather was. So they tried to get those sails up, and when you can't do that, then you're just at the mercy of the lake at that point.
They set their sails, and they had too much sails in the wind, and it took the mast down. That had to be a tremendous wind they were in.
They did start taking on water eventually. There was a bilge pump right there on the deck, so all night they fought and worked those manual pumps to try to get the water out of the hull. But early the next morning they realized that they weren't going to stay ahead of this. There was more and more water getting into that hull.
With nothing else the crew could do, it was time to make a decision.
Captain knew that they're going to have to get off of that ship and get into the lifeboat and try to get to the shoreline. They were more than 20 miles offshore at that point, so they knew that if this weather was bad enough to shear a mast off of the ship once they raised sail, they're going to have a real tough time of it. But they did get into the lifeboat. Everybody safely got in, that crew of 7. 10 minutes after they got into their lifeboat, the ship sank. So that was a pretty close call right there. But what are they going to do now? They're out there 20, 25 miles off the shoreline, and they started pulling on those oars to get to the shore. And imagine for a minute that you are in this lifeboat. What is the conversation like? Is there any conversation? Captain, last name was Knowlton, determined that they are going to try to get as close to the shoreline as possible, but ultimately his goal was to get back to Whitefish Point. But as they started pulling for the shoreline, the crew knew that they were getting closer to Crisp Point, and there was a life-saving station there at that time. Well, as they got closer to the shoreline, they did get into trouble. If you read some of the accounts, apparently someone crabbed an oar, which basically means that he got his oar out of stride with the other ones and it threw the guy out of the boat. And so they pulled this guy back into the boat, but then the boat turned over apparently at one point when they were trying to do that. Now everybody's in the water. That water is freezing cold. They're losing strength. They're hanging on to the boat. At this point, the surfman that was in the watchtower should have seen this overturned boat with humans hanging onto it. He saw something, and what he thought he saw was it was a log, basically, a big trunk of a tree.
The life-saving crew was having dinner at that time. The watchman on duty made a terrible mistake that costed the crew of the Atlanta time they didn't have.
But there just so happened to be that the township supervisor of Whitefish Township, strangely enough, was walking on the beach and happened to notice that, in fact, there were people hanging onto a boat. He ran to the station, let the keeper know, so they all got out of their dining area and raced for the shoreline. They had their cork life jackets on, they had ropes tied to themselves and other lines that they could throw out to any potential survivors. And ultimately, out of that crew of 7, they were able to help 2 people get onto the shoreline. There was a woman on board that was the cook, and one of the life-saving service crew members thought that he had rescued her, but it turned out to just be some of her clothing and part of a shawl or a blanket that she had wrapped around herself, and her body was pulled further out into the lake. But they did get two.
One of those two crew members' name was Eli Waite. Sailor Waite penned this 2 days after the life-saving service saved his life. 5 out of 7 of his shipmates drowned on May 4, 1891. This is his letter. Sir, I wish to express my thanks to the life-saving service, and this is to certify that I, Eli Waite, was saved at the point of death and was pulled out of the heavy breakers by Captain Small of the Crisp Station. I was so numb with cold I had no use of my limbs when I was pulled out, and in 10 seconds more I would have been lost, for the undertow was taking me out when the keeper ran out into the lake and pulled me ashore. I can safely say that my life was saved by Captain Small. When we got to the breakers, our boat upset and we were all thrown out, and to my knowledge 3 of our men did not rise again. The life-saving crew did their work well and all that was in their power. It was impossible to save those who were lost. They were so benumbed with the cold that they could not hang on until the lifesavers could get to them. 2 of us were all that could be saved. The rest went to the bottom and the undertow carried them out into the lake. John Pickle was saved as well as myself. I cannot express by pen my thankfulness for the kindness we received from the captain and the crew, but we can safely say that we are indebted to them for our lives. Yours respectfully, Eli Waite, Sailor, Schooner Atlanta. "130 years later."
I changed the range. Oh, there's Shipwreck. It came up on the 900. Perfect. The thing 150, I changed the range.
Oh yeah, look at her.
There, that's the Shipwreck.
Whoa.
See the cargo holes?
Yeah.
It's upright. That's worth another pass, don't you think, guys?
I think so.
All right, we got a Shipwreck.
The Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society finds where the Atlanta has been hiding for over a century. But
We knew what it was when we side scanned it, because of the size of it, but you still never know for sure until you see a name on it.
under 650 feet of darkness, something starts to appear.
A cabin wall's still intact on the port side, stern, with 2 windows frames, still in place. That's unusual because usually the cabins blow off. And that was kind of cool, but there's a lot more to explore on that ship.
Like, where's the ship's wheel?
The wheel being aft of the stern, embedded into the bottom. We were a little disappointed when we got to the stern and didn't see the wheel. And then there it is off the back of the boat.
And something a bit unexplained.
The decking on both sides of the hatches are heaved up. Like the deck is heaved up in the center, like something pushed upward on it. And I thought, well, maybe the mass, when it went down below deck, pushed up on the deck. But the stern mass looks like it was a clean break. That's a mystery to me yet, why that deck is heaved up there.
And you can see where all 3 masts were sheared off, just like the historical reports say.
The masts shearing off isn't unusual, but usually the masts are still with the ship or laying alongside the ship.
And a haunting thought. The crew of the Atlanta were trying to save their lives with these pumps and their own hands.
First time I ever seen, and that is the wood handles in the bilge pumps. So they were pumping water by hand, and so that was unusual.
The Atlanta is stunningly well preserved over 600 feet down, but one of the most important parts of the ship was this.
Oh, name. Atlanta. It's totally the Atlanta. It's name board on that ship, I've never seen anything like that. I've never seen one of all the shipwrecks we found as an organization. To see that name board
Look at that design work there.
of the Atlanta so clearly and see the scroll work around it.
When I was ROVing it and Bruce, the director of the museum, was sitting alongside me, his reaction made the whole summer for me, seeing the name on the side of that ship.
The discovery of the Atlanta teaches us that these wrecks are very real. Each one has a different story of life and loss. Thanks to the Eli Waite letter, we have a better glimpse of what happened to his 5 shipmates who disappeared on May 4th, 1891, and gives us a better appreciation for what these mariners went through just doing their job out in the lake they call Superior.